Today I want to go over some mistakes that I made when I was starting out doing stained glass, and hopefully you can avoid them and become a better stained glass artist quicker. Alright, let's go. Of course I gotta record on a construction day here. It's normally super quiet at the cemetery, and now it is the loudest day because they're doing some digging. Alright, let's get away from the noise a little bit. Alright, so the first thing that we should cover is oil and cutting. So one of the first beginner mistakes that I made was not using cutting oil when I was doing my scoring. You guys know the glass cutter is one of the main tools that we have to use in stained glass. We score the glass and then we break it, and so that's how we get our shapes out of the glass. Now that tool is very important and we should treat it as such in maintaining it and also in using the cutting oil. So when I got started, I got this cheap cutter, which is fine, and you can start out with a cheaper glass cutter just to get a feel for things. But the main problem was I didn't use any cutting oil because I didn't know about it. I started to score the glass thinking everything was going to be fine, and that's just how things were. So it turns out that the cutting oil is very important, and there are some things that you need to do when you're using the glass cutter. First thing is that blade, the sharp blade that you're doing the scoring on the glass with, that needs to be oiled up, and when it touches the surface of the glass, you'll see a tiny line of oil as you're scoring your glass. Now we don't need to dip that much oil on the glass cutter. You just need a tiny drop right on the wheel, just so there's enough for that surface as it's gliding along. Cutting oil is the most recommended thing to use. You can, however, use different alternatives if you don't have cutting oil. I'm gonna give you 3 alternatives that you can use instead of the cutting oil. First one being kerosene. So if you have kerosene, you can go ahead and use that and it'll work just fine. The second one is baby oil. Baby oil will also work, and a lot of people use baby oil, so baby oil is another option. And the third and final one, and I think is probably the best option, is sewing machine oil. So that oil is specifically made for moving parts, sewing machines, so the viscosity of that seems to be pretty appropriate for the glass cutter. So you've got those 3 options if you don't have that cutting oil, but of course cutting oil is going to be the best for your glass cutter. It is specially formulated for that. So let's say you upgraded and you got a Toyo cutter and you invested maybe $30–40 into it. Buying that tool, you should use probably the right thing for it, and cutting oil is, in my opinion, the best thing to use for glass cutters. And they're not that expensive. A bottle of like an 8-ounce bottle should be about $10, and it will last you a very, very long time. But if you had something else on hand, like I mentioned, those 3 things, then you can go ahead and use those. All right, let's keep going. Let's move on to the next thing. There's a little waterfall right there. Pretty cool. So while we're talking about the glass cutting, let's cover the other common mistake, and that is doing uneven pressure when you're scoring your glass. When you're scoring your glass, you want to keep the pressure consistent all the way through on that glass surface as you're scoring the glass. And if you're a beginner, then of course it's very hard to figure out that pressure. The thing that you have to get a feel for as you're scoring the glass, and you have to do this multiple times, many times, to just understand that type of pressure that you're exerting onto the glass. And it doesn't have to be that much pressure at all. After scoring the glass, you should see this tiny hairline that reveals itself onto the glass surface, and that means you made a pretty good score. If you don't see the score line, maybe it might not crack and break as well. The thing that you want to just keep in mind is that once you find that pressure, you want to keep that pressure consistent throughout the whole score. So as you're moving from edge to edge all the way along the glass, push it all the way through, and you can take your time on this. It doesn't have to be fast, and keep that constant pressure all the way until you get to the end, and then roll right off and you should be good to go. That's a little bonus tip for you guys. Make sure that that cutter will also go over the other edge and you don't just stop right before the finish. You might not get a complete straight line if you stop prematurely right before that edge that you're trying to cut. There's, can't zoom in too much, but there's that Golden Gate Bridge right there. But also you can see the city maybe way in the background right there. So that's San Francisco City, and there's Golden Gate Bridge. And we're on this side of it this day. So what happens with that uneven pressure? It'll probably break just the same, except on the edge. Once you break the glass, you might have one section where it is perfect, and then some sections where it didn't go through all the way, and you might have to clean it up, maybe use the grinder, or maybe have to use the carburetor stone, do some grinding. So keeping it even all along as you're doing the pressure, it's just gonna be nicer for those brakes. All right, here's another new one that probably has happened to me maybe a couple of times, and I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on, but it was using old foil when I was doing the foiling. So I had bought some old rolls and I thought they would be fine, you know, it looked fine, but it was just the outside bag was just kind of dirty, like covered in dust and stuff. Turns out though, once you go to use that on your glass, it doesn't really stick as well as a new roll should. And if you can imagine, the tackiness of the sticky film will also degrade over time. And so if you have a new roll, everything is just gonna function perfectly. But if you have an old roll, then of course that tackiness is slowly disappearing on you. The longer it goes on for however many years, then you're gonna have some type of problems. My suggestion is to always get a new roll. Hopefully that vendor, the person that sends it to you, gives you a brand new roll, and not one that's been sitting on their shelf for ages. If you do find that you peel off the sticky tape on the backing of the tape and it feels like it's not as tacky, maybe try a section of it on a glass and see how it goes. If you realize that, yeah, that tape is just completely shot, I wouldn't try to go and use it on anything, because you've spent that time to foil the glass and then now you've soldered on top of it, only to realize that that tape is just gonna peel off when you get to the soldering process. It's gonna be a bummer, and you just don't wanna get to that point, waste all your time. So make sure your tape is nice and new. And just a bit of information for you guys, usually the black tape will be a little bit more tackier than the silver ones or the copper ones. So I would go with the black one if you wanted to make sure that your tape stays on your glass as best as it can. All right, somebody's waking up. All right, let's keep going and try to finish this up. So another thing I want to mention is that when I was starting out, I used this knife sharpener, a stone that I had thought would be okay for grinding our glass. And so that was not the case. It did not do anything. I had to sit there forever trying to grind this one piece, and I tried it over and over and just felt like it was a lot of wasted time instead of picking up the right thing. It was the only thing that I had, and I didn't know that there were different options, like a carborundum stone would have been an excellent choice. I also didn't have a glass grinder at that time. I couldn't do anything else but kind of just use that sharpener. Hopefully you guys don't make the same mistake and grab whatever you think can just smooth out that glass. At the very least, go get yourself a carborundum stone. Those are fairly cheap, not have to purchase a glass grinder right away. So as you're starting out, you can just use a carborundum stone and that would be totally fine. So my tip for that one, again, is just to use the right tools for the job. Use a stone or use a grinder to grind your glass. We gotta start heading back. This kid is not cooperating. All right, now this one is a potentially dangerous one that you guys want to avoid. So the thing is, when you go to do your patina, you get to that patina process. If you're working in a small, tight space, you want to have your doors and windows open, get some ventilation, and if you don't have that, you obviously should be using some type of a filter, a mask, something that you can put on yourself to protect from smelling those fumes. I was in a garage and I was working thinking it was enough airspace for that patina. The windows were closed, the garage door was closed, and I just did the step thinking that nothing was gonna happen and had enough ventilation. Turns out that as I was doing the process, the fumes started coming up and I could smell it, and it actually irritated pretty badly for me, and I started to cough heavily. So just be sure that your windows are open, things are just, you know, fully ventilated. If you have masks or filters, use them, and that will help out as you're doing this patina step. All right, if you're interested in more tips, I've got these safety tips that I've put together for you. So if you're just starting out in stained glass, you might want to take a look at these safety tips. The glass is going to peel off right when you get to the soldering process. Make sure your tape is